Hi everybody, Matt Klaskowski here, and this is part 2 of the HDR tutorial. So you'll want to go back and watch part 1 if you haven't already, where I went into using HDR, but I talked about using it with Photoshop. So if you look under the tools menu inside of Bridge, or if you were in Photoshop, you could go under File, Automate, and you would see Merge to HDR. Now, I showed you how to go through the whole HDR process in Photoshop, but I did not keep it a secret that I'm not a big fan of Photoshop's HDR. It just doesn't really give you that great of an image. So what I do use is a program called Photomatix, and HDR is really hot right now. I'm just giving you my honest opinion on what program I use. I'd be lying to you if I told you that I did this in Photoshop. In fact, as soon as you process your first HDR inside of Photoshop, you'll very quickly realize why people don't use it. So the program is called Photomatix. I'll pull up the website really quick here. It's hdrsoft.com. I'll go into it a little bit at the end of the video, but essentially you can go download a free trial version. The trial version rocks. It's actually fully featured. The only thing it does is, in the end, it watermarks your photo, but you can run anything through it just like you would a normal photo. You're just going to have a couple watermarks on the end of it. Okay? So let me show you what got me into this. If you look over here on the left hand side of their website, this, while it's a great image, is kind of what I had always envisioned HDR as. All right, it's a great photo, but it just has some kind of a fake quality about it. All right, some people love it, some people don't. I'm kind of right in the middle of it, where I'm not so crazy about that fake quality. But then I went to their website and I went into this user gallery and I started looking through here, and there's some great photographs of John Adams. One of them here, as you look through the stuff, really stunning, but they have that fantasy effect. Well, I was poking around the website one day, and then I went to one of the other galleries and I started looking at some of the work here, and I mean, look at this stuff. It's amazing. It's beautiful work, but it's also, it doesn't look like it has that fantasy effect applied to it. And I started realizing, when you look at it closer, now you can tell there's something going on here, but this is more, I guess you can say, more of a subtle effect using HDR, where you're mainly using it to help save you time. And I'm going to show you where I became hooked on using Photomatix in just a moment here. But this is the more subtle effect, but you can go either way with it. Just my personal favorites are the types of photos where you don't necessarily know that something's been done. All right, so let's go take a look here inside of Bridge. I've got 3 photos, and they were taken in Banff National Park. I ran these through Photoshop's Merge to HDR, and I hated it. And what happened is I bracketed everything that I shot up there because I could not capture everything in one exposure. So I had to expose for the sky, and I had to expose for the foreground area, and then bring them into Photoshop and do all this manual masking, taking each one of these, lining them up in Photoshop, and it was a pain. All right, I tried HDR in Photoshop, it didn't work, and then I tried Photomatix, and I was totally blown away by it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to show you the actual first 3 photos that I tried. You open up Photomatix, first thing you do, generate HDR, and what I did here is I just selected all 3 of the photos inside of Bridge, and I just dragged them right into Photomatix's window here, and you hit OK. And there's a couple options inside here. Honestly, I'm not going to go through everything in Photomatix. I'm just going to show you kind of what I used here. Align source images. You should be shooting on a tripod, so this shouldn't be as much of an issue, but if that tripod does move or whatnot, you can try to align the images. Ghosting artifacts. If, let's say, there's water ripples or somebody moves through a background of a long exposure, you can try to reduce that. In this example here, the cloud movement is something that I'd probably want to reduce. But at this point, I'm just going to hit OK. And it's going to go through, it's going to start doing the process of merging all 3 of these exposures into an HDR image. Now, you'll see that if you look back over here inside of Bridge, I did this with RAW files. You could just as easily do this with JPEGs as well. The main thing to kind of keep in mind is just shoot on a tripod and look up in your camera manual, look up how to do the bracketing feature inside your camera manual, and then that way you'll get multiple exposures of the same scene. I'm using 3 here. More often than not, I generally use 5. You can do 7, you can do 9. I think 7 and 9 could be overkill, but 5 seems to be like a good number for me these days. So I've been sticking with 5 different exposures. All right, so it takes a moment or two, but you can see here it's done and it's brought up our photo. Now, if you think this is what your photo looks like, it's not. All right, this is not the full HDR version of your photo. This is what Photomatix has merged together, and it tells you here it's in the unprocessed state. So what we do is we click on tone mapping. All right, and when you do that, the photo instantly becomes 100% better. All right, so take a look at this. All right, that's pretty darn good considering we haven't done a thing to it yet in any of the settings here. Okay, this was my very first experience with Photomatix, and that's kind of what got me hooked on it. Now, up here you've got some different settings. You've got strength. Strength is kind of like the fantasy look. All right, all the way down toward the left, you see that we don't have too much of a fantasy look here. And then over here toward the right, you'll see that we get more of a fantasy look. All right, so it's kind of just really what effect are you going for. I'm going to bring it down probably into the 50-60 range, and that kind of gives me a pretty decent balance between both of them. All right, color saturation, exactly what it says. Over to the left, low saturation. To the right, higher saturation. Light smoothing. Light smoothing, think of this as your total Harry Potter effect setting. All right, if you bring this guy all the way over to the left, you're going to get major Harry Potter effect, especially when the strength is bumped up. And you bring it over toward the right, and you will get very little Harry Potter fantasy look to it. All right, I usually kind of like the 4th one here, but sometimes I go with high. Now we have our histogram below, and then we have our white, black, and gamma. Think of these as your sliders inside of levels. All right, the white slider, the black slider, and then the mid-tone, the gray slider. So, and they work just a lot like those sliders do. You can see I can really pump up my highlights with white. With black, I can really increase the contrast and pump up some of those shadowy areas. And then finally, gamma is going to do a good job inside of those mid-tones. And you can see it does a lot of work inside of the mountains and inside of the trees here. Okay. So as I look at this, I might come in here, maybe drag my strength down just a little bit, but that looks pretty good. You've got a bunch of other tabs in here, and if you do go with it, definitely go in there, experiment with the tabs, because you can get a lot of your post work done right inside of Photomatix. You won't even need to go into Photoshop too much. So check out the tabs here, but I'm going to click on the process button. And what process is going to do is actually going to convert this into a usable image that I can now open inside of Photoshop and do other things with. And that's the workflow. You'll want to do your HDR processing first. All right, and then after you do the HDR processing, then you take it and you move into Photoshop and you do any Photoshop-like things that you'd have to do to it. So in this photo here, maybe I'd come in here and burn in the trees a little bit because it does look a little fake. Any spot removal, any retouching, I do that after the fact with the photo inside of Photoshop. Now, again, remember, this is no Photoshop whatsoever at this point. That's pretty darn good. I didn't have to go into Photoshop. I didn't have to do any masking. I didn't have to do anything. Photomatix did it all for me, and it did a nice job of it. It's probably, for my taste, probably a little bit too far toward that fantasy look, but this is a pretty darn cool looking photo. And you go down to File, you choose Save As, and you'll see here you've got a few different options to save the photo. And then that's what you can open up into Photoshop. All right, so now let's go back to their website. Let me just show you a couple more things here. First off, just be known that I have no affiliation with these guys at HDR Soft. They have no idea who I am. I really do believe in their product. It saves me a lot of time. Landscape photography, I'm bracketing everything I shoot now. Real estate photography, interior photography, product photography, it really opens up amazing possibilities for you. Now, it does cost. You got to buy it. The Pro version is $99, and then there's a tone mapping plugin that goes into Photoshop for $69. Here's the thing. If you're going to buy it, spend the extra $30 and get the Pro version. It's got some better features inside of it that you'll make up for that $30. So if you've decided, you've downloaded the trial, you like it, you want to buy it, spend the extra $30 and go ahead and get the Pro version of it because it'll be worth it. But it's hdrsoft.com. The program's called Photomatix, and it really has changed the way that I do a lot of my work inside of Photoshop, especially when it comes to interiors, landscape photography. When you can bracket and you can bring it into this HDR program, it'll save you a ton of time from going into Photoshop and having to manually, add mask and mask things away and erase things, and it just takes a long time. So there you have it, my take on HDR. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.